Hi, for this first episode of TWC's Digital Leadership series, I'm delighted to be joined once more by Salih Sheikh, former Head of Digital and Marketing at Best Way Wholesale, currently FWD's Young Wholesaler of the Year, and investor and active participant in an exciting new food startup. Salih, hi.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So the purpose of today's chat is to hear what you've been doing since you left Best Way. But kind of before we get on to that, would it be possible for you to give me a potted history of your CV? I sort of don't know you pre-Best Way, so it might help me with context.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I came out of uni and joined, I kind of always knew that I wanted to work in marketing, something around, like I've always just really enjoyed psychology and understanding what drives people, whether that be people development or whether that be from a marketing perspective. So the first role that I went into was for a small experiential marketing agency called RPM. And I was fortunate enough to work on a range of really market leading brands, such as a few Diageo brands like Talisker and Smirnoff. I worked on Sky and Strongbow. So I was really fortunate and, actually achieved one of my favorite things that I've achieved in my career so far, which was for Talisker, we created the world's first sail-in cinema, which was pretty cool, especially considering I'm a massive film nerd. So I did that and then moved on to go and work for Nestle. So I moved up to York and joined the confectionery arm of Nestle and worked within shopper marketing for a period, and then went and worked in the category team for the seasonal confectionery category team. So that was, hugely like a completely different experience, as you can imagine, and really helpful, really useful. I learned a lot, which was kind of the goal behind doing that move. And then after that, I then moved on to JWT, who are the world's kind of biggest ad agency. And I was working as a planner there on Nokia. So that, in some ways perhaps was my first kind of entry into the digital world as well. And, that was kind of the role I'd been gunning for since I'd left uni, was to be a planner at a big ad agency. So I was really thrilled to get it, and really amazing to work on such a challenging brand like Nokia, as opposed to working on someone like Apple, who would have been, much simpler and perhaps not quite as interesting. And so bizarrely, and then following that, I then moved on to Best Way, obviously. It was never really my plan to join Best Way, mainly because my skill set kind of lands in more consumer-facing brand building and marketing. However, an opportunity came up, and it kind of just seemed like the right thing for my career to move there. So I then joined Best Way. I worked on a couple of other parts of the business, and then moved into kind of the marketing arm of the wholesale business. Kind of rose through to become head of marketing and eventually head of digital and sit on the exec team, which, again, was probably the most useful experience. The time I spent at Best Way was undoubtedly the most useful experience I had. But yeah, strangely, and by no means of any sort of genius kind of design of my own, I managed to work across this kind of holy trifecta of spending time working agency side, working manufacturer side, and then also working distributor side. Which, as you can imagine, gave me a really good breadth and depth of understanding for all the key elements of the supply chain and the business world.
Amazing. And certainly from my perspective, you undertook some major transformation digitally at Best Way, which I'll be looking forward to hearing more about, hopefully. But as of now, my understanding is you're involved as an investor and an active participant in an exciting new startup. So can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I guess like about a year ago, I was connected with the CEO of my current business, who's a guy called Faraz Nagri. And Faraz basically had this, brilliant idea for a business that was just really, it's so current and relevant for, for these times and this kind of environment, and, still involved within food. And I just thought it was an absolutely brilliant idea. His partner is the ex-CFO of Deliveroo, who's a guy called Phil Green. And so, the more I heard about the business, the more I learned about it, I was just really keen to get involved in it and invest in it. So I invested into the business, and, very kindly stayed in touch with Phil and Faraz, and very kindly they, were, invited me to become chief marketing officer of the business. And the business effectively, there's kind of 2 or 3 core components to the business. So Lean Kitchen, which is the name of the business, at its core is its goal is to create the world's most kind of efficient food kitchens, delivery food kitchens. So, I guess looking at the market and the environment around, and, looking at how kind of restaurants are coping with some of the stresses that they're having to deal with in terms of, food costs rising due to inflation, having to pay for, staff, and, inflation in staff wages and rents, et cetera. Running restaurants and, the hospitality industry especially is becoming more and more difficult. And the beauty of the dark kitchen space, which is where Lean Kitchen plays, is that you don't have a front of house, and therefore your costs are much more contained, and you become much more efficient as a result. So that was at its core. That's what Lean Kitchen does. Lean Kitchen is effectively trying to build a network of the world's most efficiently run kitchens. And then the second part of that. So whilst I'm chief marketing officer of Lean Kitchen, I'm also the de facto managing director of as a kind of side part of the business called Future Food Brands. So Future Food Brands is effectively the digital marketing arm of Lean Kitchen. And what the purpose of Future Food Brands is to create kind of these virtual restaurants that will sit on, that will be cooked out of the Lean Kitchen kitchens, and will sit on kind of delivery platforms like Deliveroo and Uber. So our goal is basically to get as much insight as we can from delivery operators, from the market in general, trends, etc., and create really relevant and in-demand restaurants that are entirely virtual and sit on delivery platforms. And then the third part of this kind of offering is the digital marketing part. So I think what sets us apart and makes us unique from a lot of the industry within dark kitchens at the moment, and perhaps a lot of the hospitality industry as a whole, is that we've got Future Food Brands is actually a joint venture with a company called Jungle Creations, who are one of the biggest social media houses in the world. So they've managed to build a number of social media channels that across them have millions and millions of followers. One of which is called Twisted, which is a food community, which again, has got millions of followers across the world. So what that has helped us do is, therefore, not only are we creating these virtual restaurant brands, we're obviously then having the recipes, etc., prepared by the kitchen development chefs. They're being prepared within our dark kitchens. But then we've got this really powerful digital marketing arm that is then marketing these restaurants and ensuring that we're able to raise awareness around these brands. And then the last bit really is this has happened almost by chance, but we've found ourselves almost emerging as a marketing channel for big brands. So what's happened is that as an example, so you've got brands like we did a recent tie-up with PepsiCo for Wotsits, and their kind of objective was Wotsits had just released 2 new flavors, and they wanted to raise as much awareness as possible around these 2 new flavors. And so what we did effectively, and what we were able to deliver for them, is we got our development chefs to prepare a kind of bespoke recipe for Wotsits, and it ended up being a Wotsits mac and cheese, which, by the way, was delicious. And they kind of, the development chefs infused, the flavors and the actual Wotsits of the 2 new flavors, as well as the original flavor, into this mac and cheese. We then kind of added that mac and cheese to one of our restaurants, our most successful restaurant so far, which is called Twisted London. And Twisted London is an offshoot of that Twisted community I was just talking about, that has millions of followers that Jungle created. And as a result, what we were able to do is, we managed to, when we put the content live, it was only for 2 days, but the content managed to generate kind of 4.5 million impressions on our social pages and Twisted social pages. We managed to sell out of mac and cheeses within the 2 days. So we sold 200 plus within 2 days. And PepsiCo in particular and Watsons managed to generate a huge amount of PR, and also managed to reach kind of over 1 million eyeballs just through one video in the UK alone. So, and we've done loads of those. So we've done ones around Love Island for Uber Eats when they were sponsoring Love Island last year, which was really cool because basically the whole promotion was that you could send a pie to a friend who you'd pied off in the past as an apology. So kind of leaning on some of the elements of the show. And we've done one for Stella around Wimbledon. So it's something that we seem to be increasingly becoming this very interesting marketing channel that fuses the virtual and digital worlds with the real world.
And if I'm understanding it correctly, then one dark kitchen can theoretically produce food for several different restaurant brands, and that you're moving into areas as data is dictating the market demands it. So in effect, you're very nimble in terms of being able to change your branding, keep your costs lean. So it's a much more sustainable business model than the traditional restaurant.
Yeah, absolutely. And very fitting you use the word lean there, by the way, as well. But yeah, the idea is that we've built up 5 brands so far. And, we've got kind of a pipeline of brands that we have already been working on and already, kind of developing in the background, using kind of insight that we can get for where food trends are going, and also speaking to delivery operators. But yes, exactly that. The advantage is that any new area that you then open up in, you can, we can speak to the delivery operators, understand kind of what are the more in-demand food types within and cuisines within that area. And then hopefully we have a brand that suits that, and then we can kind of tailor what brands we put into which areas. And meanwhile, obviously, we'll continue to develop brands in the background as well, depending on what we learn basically around what's happening with food trends.
So I'm suspecting that this is quite a disruptive market space in kind of, it's going to be threatening traditional cash and carries, traditional takeaways, it's a Freudian slip, traditional takeaways and also traditional restaurants. So I'm guessing it's got some big investors involved in it, but can you explain a bit more about how the market has shaped out that you've joined?
Yeah, definitely. It's a market that is really hotting up. So it's been around for a few years, maybe like 2 or 3 years now. But in the last year or so, it's really started to hot up. So there are 4 kind of key, I guess, like participants within this market. The first is the delivery aggregators themselves. So that's Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Just Eat. And then you've got kind of ones that are tailored towards corporate catering, so Feeder, Caterwings are examples of those. Then you've got the second kind of section is delivery aggregators who own kitchen spaces. So the most famous example of this is Deliveroo Editions. So Deliveroo opened, the Editions side of their business, I think a couple of years ago now, and they've just got dark kitchens basically across, across London and other parts of the world. That they can then tap into their partner restaurants on their platform, and any restaurant that is looking to expand is able to then move into one of these spaces very quickly, and set up shop and start to even perhaps to test. They could even use it to test kind of that part of the city and see whether they should be opening a proper bricks and mortar restaurant there, for example. Is the demand strong enough, etc. So that's the second part. The third part of the market is literally players who just own kind of dark kitchen spaces. So the most famous and probably the biggest in this space at the moment is Cloud Kitchens. And Cloud Kitchens were actually the founder of Uber invested in Cloud Kitchens, and they managed to raise something like $200 million in their last raise. So you can see how kind of exciting an area of investment this is becoming, and therefore how exciting in the future people must believe it has. And then the last area is companies who create just virtual restaurant brands, so brands purely for delivery only brands. And examples are, there's a company called Taster, there's another one called Keats,
So if I'm understanding correctly based on my own experience, is it true that at the moment this market is particularly prevalent in cities? I mean, you've mentioned when we've talked before that it exists as a sector in other parts of the world. It's big in Dubai. I'm guessing it's big in the States. But in this country, I guess I've got a vested interest because I live in the suburbs and I don't see it around me. So is it true that at the moment it's quite city-centric? But do you think it will reach me?
Well, you and I both have the same vested interest, so I'm in a very similar position. And for the last 4 or 5 weeks, I haven't been able to get any, delivery food or takeaway because I also live in the suburbs, and the delivery aggregators just don't operate here. So, yeah, you and I both are in the same boat, and I've definitely got my fingers crossed as well. But that's precisely kind of what's happened. Yeah, kind of made sense for the delivery aggregators to start off in the kind of major urban city centres, both in the UK and abroad, because you've got high population density. That better chance of driving demand in those sorts of areas. So and now really those kind of city centre areas. If anyone who's kind of gone into London or Edinburgh, or if you go into any of those major cities now and open up Uber Eats or Deliveroo, and there's just like hundreds of options of restaurants. So it's become quite saturated, and really the big focus for growth now, in particular amongst all the delivery aggregators, is outside the big cities. So the key is if they can find areas around the country where enough demand can be built, then they will absolutely get a fleet in place and hire a fleet and get going in those sorts of areas. But that's really where if you, in terms of support and what the delivery aggregators are looking for, they will really support businesses at the moment who help them to grow in areas outside of the major city centres. And that's it's almost inevitable in a huge area of growth coming in the coming few months and years.
So I need to watch this space then, and it'll be okay.
Absolutely, it's coming.
Excellent. So, I mean, it feels like this is a sector that wholesalers need to be aware of. I mean, clearly it's having a direct impact on food service, but I'm guessing that it's not a massive stretch that when you're ordering your takeaway delivery, you can also be ordering your bottle of vodka, your bottle of wine, and your 1 litre or 1.5 litre Cokes. Would that be true?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And in fact, that was one of the things why I thought it would be quite interesting to speak about the business as well. So, I'm really grateful that you've given me the opportunity to. But we'll start on the food service side first. So it's this really like quickly emerging market now, this kind of dark kitchen space. And what that brings for wholesalers and food service operators is opportunity, right? So you've got a new kind of base of customers for you to go after, and frankly their demands are not that different from the restaurants and cafes you're already probably serving. So if I look at our business as an example, we're looking for fresh meat and vegetables and dairy and seasonings and all that sort of stuff, as well as packaging. So it's really it's definitely a new opportunity area for food service operators and wholesalers to go after, and one that that is growing fast and will probably be around for a while. So and then the second element, I think you mentioned about buying kind of 2 litre bottles of Coke, etc. But again, I think this has been a really interesting period, this lockdown period, since the emergence of COVID-19. Because all of a sudden, what you've seen is there were, a few kind of the delivery aggregators were working with a few of the convenience stores around the country, and you could see a few of them in some places on these delivery platforms. But all of a sudden, they've really rapidly accelerated that. Keeping in mind that they knew that people were trying to keep safe by not leaving their houses, etc. And so they suddenly saw a real opportunity, I guess, in some ways, to very quickly build this convenience offering, so that people didn't have to leave their houses, and those who are old or perhaps find it more difficult or have mobility issues, etc., that they could have kind of convenience goods delivered straight to their door. So it is interesting what this period has done, and how quickly it's accelerated movements that were already being made in the market.
So I'm guessing that as you're building restaurant brands, virtual restaurant brands, someone out there will be busy building a virtual convenience brand of some description, possibly in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it would not surprise me. And you know, like I said, there's already convenience stores popping up all over the delivery platforms. So it seems like the logical next step.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much. It's such an interesting subject. I could talk about it for hours, but it's been amazing. So back to the main theme of this series of digital leadership. I think we're going to reconvene next week to talk about infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Admittedly not the sexiest thing to start off with, and especially when you're talking about as interesting a topic as digital. But frankly, probably the most fundamental, from based on my experience, the most fundamental to get right. So, I hope it'll be one of real interest, and really do encourage people to come back next week and have a listen.
Yes. Well, Salih, thank you so much for your time today, and I'll look forward to talking to you again next week. Thank you.